Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Kelly. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Ginkgo Bioworks. Rick, did you take a clicker? Don't make a run for it. Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that this is actually a really amazing group of people in here. Just walking around in the last half an hour, I bumped into like 30 people I knew, like Rick mentioned. I think that Katie and the engine, great credit to you all for, I think, filling a big gap in the ecosystem around tough tech. So I think it's actually like a perfect time for both this meeting and an organization like the Engine to exist. So I'm going to talk about three things today. I'll give you a little bit of background on Ginkgo. I think the reality is 95% of you don't really care about biology, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that. But I am going to try to generalize my experience after that on some of our kind of history of the company, building a tech company, and then Katie asked me to sort of mouth off a little bit on fundraising for hard tech companies, so we'll talk about that too. All right, cool. So what does Ginkgo do? This is sort of one of my favorite articles about the company. It says, move over Johnny Ive. Biologists are the next rock star designers. So fundamentally what we do is we design and engineer biology, which sort of seems like a crazy idea. So sort of the average person on the street. Not too surprising if you know one fact about biology, which is that fundamentally it runs on digital code in the form of DNA. And we can read this code with DNA sequencing, and we can write this code with DNA synthesis. And if you can read and write code, you have a machine that'll run it. That's programming as far as we're concerned, and so you can program biology. Ginkgo is the largest printer or designer of printed DNA in the world. So these are sort of our orders. DNA sequencing is basically you put a cell into a machine and out on a computer comes ATCGG. DNA printing is the exact opposite. You go on a computer, ATCGG, you hit print, and out of the machine comes the DNA you wanted. We ordered from the industry as a whole, Twist and Gen 9. Back in January of last year, we acquired Gen 9 as a local company here and placed a 1 billion base pair order with Twist this year. So by our estimate, we're about 30% of worldwide DNA printing is designed by Ginkgo or printed in-house. The other technology we have is basically, so my background, I was a PhD in bioengineering at MIT, trying to more or less put myself out of business. We take the lab protocols that would be done by a bench scientist, and we standardize them. We move them onto robotics. This is a picture of one of the bays in our facility down the seaport. We have about 100,000 square foot facility. And really the key, just to give you some numbers behind it, this is our kind of lab. We call these unit operations, basically lab protocols per month in the facility. We've been roughly doubling the total number of operations every 6 months for the last 4 years, going from about 10,000 operations now up, and that's a little out of date, but close to 2 million operations a month. So we're seeing sort of our version of an exponential sort of Moore's Law type thing when it comes to doing the actual lab work you need to sort of debug and engineer cells. What do we do with all this? We basically design cells to meet specs that customers give to us. An example of that, we did a $100 million joint venture with Bayer in October of last year on the ag side of the business to work on genetically engineering cells that would grow on corn or wheat or rice to produce fertilizer. But really for Ginkgo, that's just a programming project. They come to us with the spec. Our job is to use our facilities to meet it. We did a partnership this summer with a Canadian cannabis company called Kronos, $120 million deal to do cannabinoids. We did partnerships with the defense and biosecurity departments around basically resisting viruses. And today we have about 50 microbes under contract with 25 different customers, ADM, Cargill, Ajinomoto, basically large companies, sweeteners with a beverage company, things like that. Okay. So that's what Ginkgo does. And if anyone wants to check it out, we're down the seaport, and I'll have my email up at the end. I'm happy to give a tour. So timeline on the company. All right, so this is 2008 when we started the company. We bootstrapped it. So the initial funding into the company was 4 of us that were doing grad school together, and the 5th founder was an MIT professor, Tom Knight. Tom put, I think, about $100,000, $120,000 into the company, and we started collecting used lab equipment when MIT labs would shut down. It was 2008. There was a whole bunch of biotech companies showing down, so we were like backing U-Hauls up to biotechs and loading up boxes of stuff like that you see in the middle there, lab supplies, things like that. Literally taking old sinks out of MIT to try to build our lab. I think we spent, this is a picture, yeah, this was in 2009. The city of Boston, late Mayor Menino gave us a $150,000 loan to open up down the seaport, not because the seaport was hip and awesome and growing fast, but because it was the cheapest place in Boston. And so we set up our lab there. We probably built that first lab out like all the equipment, everything for like, $150K, $200K, which is sort of ridiculous for a biolab. But we were scraping along, making it work. Between 2008 and 2014, we were basically building the first generation of our technology and essentially running on government grants. So we applied for about 100 grants. I tried to dig it up. I used to have this awesome spreadsheet of like every single grant we had applied for and which ones we had got and not. And we basically ran it like a sales funnel from many NSF, DARPA, ARPA-E, DOE, just tremendous. I mean, Ginkgo would not exist without the early support of places like ARPA-E and DARPA and NSF. And so I'll talk about that later. But about $15 million of funding over this period, and the company was maybe 10 to 20 people during that time. We got our first customers initially in the fragrance industry. So I mentioned that project like the cannabinoids. Fragrance company would come to us and say, hey, wouldn't it be cheaper to get mint oil if you brewed it up in a brewery? And we'd say, yeah, sure, we could engineer a brewer's yeast. We could take the genes from mint and we'll put it in the yeast and you'll brew it up and you'll get mint oil. And so we started to do a number of contracts there. Pretty clearly capital limited, and we felt we had a story. So we decided to do Y Combinator in summer 2014. Sam Altman had just taken over and put out a call for more kind of breakthrough tech companies. We were the first life science company they backed. And then within about 6 months, we did a round of about $45 million. That was led by Viking Global, so a large kind of public market hedge fund in New York that did some kind of crossover rounds in biotech. And since YC, we've raised about $430 million. Most recently, in December of last year, $275 million round led by General Atlantic in New York. Largest investor, like I said, is Viking. Also Cascade, Bill Gates' family office, Bailey Gifford in Scotland, GA, and a couple others. So two very different eras of Ginkgo. One where we were sort of building the technology, growing slowly, largely on government funding, got the technology to sort of a bit of a critical mass, started adding customers, did Y Combinator, tapped equity markets, and then kind of started scaling the company. We were listed number 7 on CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, which I only mentioned because the other companies on this list are things like Uber and Airbnb. And so I think you are starting to see bio companies, but also just tough tech companies in general, if they're growing fast and have a good story, can get mentioned alongside more traditional kind of consumer tech companies that tend to dominate these stories. Okay, cool. So that's what I want to say about the timeline. All right, so last bit. Fundraising. I call this the SpaceX problem. So SpaceX is a pretty fucking amazing company. They just landed 2 rockets simultaneously. Like, that's awesome. It's pretty sad to me that like there's a decent chance that whole company wouldn't exist without Elon Musk's largesse, right? Like, so we as a kind of like capitalist economy here in the U.S., like that shouldn't be a dice roll whether SpaceX exists or not. There should be a healthy pipeline producing SpaceXs if it's the right time to have a company like that, and it clearly is the right time to have a company like that. They landed 2 rockets simultaneously. It's awesome. Okay, right? And so what's the deal with this problem? Okay, so my belief is that tough tech, using the word here, that could be the basis for successful companies like SpaceX is abundant. I actually think there's tons of untapped SpaceXs out there, tons of technology that could be really strong, robust, $40, $50 billion businesses. So the limitation, why aren't they happening? It's either talent or capital. And I think the core challenge in both cases, and I'll touch on it, is that tough tech requires deep specialized knowledge. Okay? And I'll come back to this in a minute, but this is weirdly like Silicon Valley and Y Combinator, and people have like a major problem with this because it's like the whole mental model. It's like, I just dropped out of Harvard. I'm gonna shoot a rocket. Right? The reality is that these companies need, you gotta know what the hell's going on, right? If you're a founder, you gotta know what to do so you make good technical decisions. If you're an investor, you gotta know what's going on so you can actually, not get ripped off, right? And so talent or capital. So let's talk about talent first. I actually think this one's, my personal opinion, I think this is an easy one to solve. Okay? Because there is actually a great training ground for founders who are deep specialists. It's called graduate school, okay, right? There is a ton of, and if you rewind, Y Combinator, when it first got started, Paul Graham, you can read this essay, paulgraham.com/MIT, back in 2006, a year after YC got started, he wrote up this essay about like why YC went looking at students that were just coming out of school. And he talks about a couple things. Number one, he said, these students they usually, the best ones get snapped up by like Microsoft right after they graduate, and it's so cushy, they never come back to the startup ecosystem. So I have to get them before they leave, right? They're like an untapped pool of founders, all right? So I'll come back to that. And then he said, second, as a young founder, you've got stamina, poverty, rootlessness, colleagues, and ignorance, right? And so I'll just break those down. Stamina is sort of obvious. Young, have a lot of time, whatever. Poverty is interesting. Basically what he's saying was, you're used to living on peanuts, right? Like you can get by in that early stage when you have to grind it out, startup lifestyle. We had a long period of this at Ginkgo. Listen, I'm telling you what, PhD students, they're not doing it for the money, okay, right? Same exact situation as undergrads coming out of PhD, where you're also used to living on nothing. Rootlessness was his point, was there's only a few really big hubs for starting companies for whatever reason that is. Fortunately, Boston is one of them. So people will need to move often, but after graduate school is a great time to move. A lot of people move after graduate school. Colleagues, there are a lot of people around in an undergrad environment, was what Paul was talking about, to be co-founders. Same thing. How are you possibly going to find another deep tech specialist co-founder who knows you and you work well with? Maybe it's your benchmate in your lab, right? So again, great place to find co-founders. And then finally, ignorance is this ignorance of knowing like what a pain in the ass it is to start up a company. And also PhDs will have that in spades. So my argument is that this is an identical situation for PhD students. And then to Paul's original point of like grabbing them up, well, a lot of the best PhD students, where are they going? Well, they're going into academia, right? And academia is pretty cush. Like once someone ends up a professor, you'll notice Tom Knight, rare exception at Ginkgo, left MIT 2 years into Ginkgo to come full time. But almost every academic professor is like, I'm a founder. He's like showing up to three advisory meetings a year. Some horse shit. And so the truth. Right. So it's a hard job to get people out of, right? But the beauty of it is the academic system has set up the postdoc, which is this like miserable grind you go through between grad school and becoming a professor. And it's a great alternative to doing a postdoc would be go start a company. And if it doesn't work out, I promise the postdoc's still waiting, right? So that was what we did at Ginkgo. We were like, well, listen, all right, here's the deal among the 5 of us, or 4 of us that were grad students. We'll do this, and if things are going well year over year, we'll keep doing it, and if not, we'll go back and go get postdocs, go be professors, okay? And fortunately, Ginkgo kept going up, or at least enough that we kept showing up for 5 years, and then a lot over the last 4 years. So okay. All right, that's talent. I think. So by the way, my point is, I think you just steal the Y Combinator playbook wholesale, but you only allow PhDs to apply. That's my answer to talent. Okay. Capital, not as easy. Okay, so capital for early stage companies with technical risk is absent from the ecosystem. Late stage, widely available. So once you have your rocket company, landing rockets or whatever the hell it is, once you're over some hump, okay, and you have commercial traction, you are going to have no problem. There are plenty of hard tech companies out there that are public and have tons of investors investing in them. Not an issue at all, no problem. The issue is the early stage, and I categorize early stage, let's call it the first 20 million bucks, flexible number here. But if you're a company that has only business risk, all right, okay, like you're like the latest app startup on your iPhone, okay, not a question whether you can build the app, question whether people care, business risk. Tons of capital available for you. And the reason for this is a generalist VC who's not deep and specialized in anything can see a lot of deal flow of people showing up with business ideas, and they just got to be like, a brilliant HBS person or something and do, whatever, and say, okay, yeah, I think that one's going to work, that one's not, all right? So there's plenty of deal flow for those people, so that venture community can exist. Technical scientific risk, well, to make those decisions pre the tech being de-risked, you have to be deep in the technology. And the problem is if you're deep in the technology, the deal flow you're going to be able to get is like only that one area of tech that you know about. And so it's very limited. And I would argue the only exception to this is pharma. So pharma has like enough deal flow that you have like PhD venture capitalists in pharma, right? That actually are deep in that technology. That to me is the only example of like functioning early stage hard tech capitals in pharmaceuticals or tough tech. Okay. So what do we do about this? Throw a couple of quick things up there. Okay, so approach number 1, hustle. All right, this is the most common chart I show to tough tech founders that come talk to me. Look, if you want to, let's say this, a common fallacy people say about hard tech is that it's too expensive. Like you're going to spend a ton of money before you have any results. Okay, true. That's sort of the graph I'm showing there on the left. Okay, I got to spend $10 million and have a successful, whatever clinical trial or something and pops up. But that's what you're really trying to achieve is like what Twitter has. So for example, like a place like Twitter also spent a ton of money before making any money, right? So it's not an issue of spending money. The trick is Twitter could say value equals number of users on Twitter. Facebook could say value equals number of users on Facebook before they turned on any advertising. So their graph was smooth. They'd spend a little money, add users, raise money at a stepped up valuation. They could march up that very easily, okay? So you need to find ways to do that, even if you're a hard tech company. So a good example of this company, Boom Technologies, are doing a supersonic jet out of YC. Out of Y Combinator, they did some PR thing with Richard Branson. He's going to build a plane, all this stuff. And you know what? That was enough, right? It wasn't building the plane, right? You could have looked at that and said, you won't be worth anything until you've built a plane. No, once they had gone and got that deal, the company was incrementally more valuable. They could raise money at a $20 million pre or something, get some money, keep going, and then most recently, just a year ago, they raised another $33 million. Great example of sort of hustling to show incremental improvements that aren't necessarily your technology being finished, but something else about the company. Okay. Another one, this is what Ginkgo did. Government funding. Like, don't be afraid of it, right? So there's a weird bias against this in Silicon Valley. We ate this up. I think it is absolutely the way that many companies in this room, many founders in this room should look at the first $15 or $20 million of funding. It's actually getting better. DARPA has this easy BAA thing, which you can turn around pretty quick and get $500,000. But I think these programs like SBR and DARPA should be 10 or 100 times bigger for funding this gap. Okay. Another one, and I'll just highlight it because it works in pharma. If you have a way, and in your industry, you might be able to find a regulatory body and work with them on this, but pharma does this great, which is to say somewhere prior to full de-risking of the technology, a third party is going to say, this is looking good. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, those open up and unlock pools of capital in therapeutics because some other party that isn't the founder has gone out and said, yep, it's going well, and then there's another group of funders. And last, approach number 4, we could continue to rely on the whims of billionaires in order to fund our hard tech companies. And so I'll end on this. I'll just say, listen, I'm a big Elon Musk fan. All right, just note that the two whims he picked, SpaceX and Tesla. These are, SpaceX is publicly trading at 40 billion or whatever it is, 50 billion now. SpaceX is private, but it's got to be 20 or 30 billion. Tough tech works, okay, right? And by the way, I agree with Rick. Tough tech is a pretty rough name. I think we should be calling it real tech, all right? Because these assholes with a ride-sharing app or a photo-sharing app do not deserve to call it tech. We deserve to call it tech. All right.